I don't remember closing my eyes that night. I don't remember slipping into sleep. But I remember waking in a place that wasn't my room. The shadows were too sharp, the air too heavy. Yet, in the corner, something stood, silent, still, watching. It didn't move when I looked at it. It didn't breathe. It was as if the darkness itself had gathered into a human shape, faceless, yet familiar. And then I realized this wasn't a dream I could escape from. This was a journey I had to endure. The dream began to change, shifting me from one nightmare to the next. And no matter where I went, I always felt the weight of that stranger, standing somewhere, just out of sight. The hallway stretched further than my eyes could see, its wallpaper peeled like dead skin, the edges curling, damp with some dark moisture. Each bulb overhead flickered one by one, humming with an almost living sound. I took a step. My footsteps echoed, then echoed again, as if something followed, perfectly in rhythm. I turned back. Nothing. Just the start of the hallway, already shrinking into distance. The air grew tighter with every step forward, as though the hallway itself wanted to close in and swallow me. And then I saw it. At the very end, a figure. Small at first, but every time I blinked, it stood closer. Not walking, not moving, just there, waiting. ChatGPT said. The floor beneath me felt uneven, as though the wood was warping under my weight. Every creak lingered longer than it should have, echoing down the corridor until it dissolved into something that no longer sounded like wood, at all something closer to a moan. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself, and it was wet. My fingers came away slick with something that glistened faintly in the light. The smell grew stronger the farther I walked. Dampness, mixed with iron, sharp and metallic, curling into my lungs until I felt sick. I wanted to turn back, but the distance I had traveled seemed impossible. Behind me was only darkness, stretching forever, swallowing the doorway I thought I had come through. The figure at the end of the hallway hadn't moved, but its presence weighed on me, pressing against my chest with invisible hands. I couldn't hear it breathe, couldn't see it shift, yet I felt certain that it was aware of me, every step I took drawing me deeper into its gaze. I tried to tell myself it was just a shadow, a trick of the flickering lights, but even shadows don't lean forward as if listening. The bulbs above hummed louder. Then one burst, raining down sparks that fizzled before they touched the floor. For a moment, the darkness swallowed the space, and when the light returned, the figure seemed closer again. I hadn't seen it move, hadn't heard a single footstep, but the gap between us had thinned like the narrowing of a breath. I whispered to myself, just to hear my own voice, just to prove I was still real in this place that didn't feel like mine. The sound died too quickly, absorbed by the walls, as though the house itself refused to carry it forward. In the silence that followed, another sound grew soft, faint, almost delicate. The rhythm of footsteps, perfectly mirroring mine. I froze, refusing to move, holding my breath until my lungs burned. The echo stopped too. Then, slowly, deliberately, came a single step forward. Not mine, not an echo. The sound was heavier, closer, sinking into the air as though the figure wanted me to know it could move whenever it wished. I tried to run, but my legs felt as though they were wading through thick water. Each movement was slow, heavy, dragging me down while the hallway stretched longer and longer. The figure never ran, never rushed, simply stood. And yet, no matter how far I moved, it was always closer, its form sharpening from shadow into shape until I could almost see the outline of its face. The air inside was colder than anything I had ever felt. It wasn't the sharp sting of winter, but something deeper, like the chill of soil freshly dug from the earth. I could see my breath drifting out in front of me, curling into shapes that seemed to hang too long in the room before dissolving into the walls. The silence pressed down heavy, so thick that I could hear the faint thud of my own heartbeat in my ears, uneven and frantic. The sheets on the bed rippled as if something had just shifted beneath them, though nothing was there. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, splashing into the puddle forming on the floor, each drop louder than it should have been, echoing in a way that made the room feel endless. I wanted to back away, but the door that had sealed shut behind me made it clear there was nowhere to go. The stranger in the corner had not moved. The longer I stared, the less certain I was that it hadn't. Its outline seemed to breathe, swelling and shrinking with a rhythm that didn't belong to human lungs. Its head tilted ever so slightly, as if it had been watching me from the moment I stepped inside, waiting for me to finally notice. My throat tightened, and I tried to speak, to ask what it was or why it stood there, but no sound came out. My voice seemed stolen, locked away before it could escape my lips. My mouth opened and closed in silence, my own breath scraping in my throat like gravel, as though the room itself had swallowed my words. The walls trembled, a low pulse that moved beneath the wallpaper like veins under skin. I pressed my palm against it, and it pushed back warm, alive, and beating. I staggered away, nearly slipping on the wet floor. And when I looked again at the corner, the figure's shape had sharpened. What had been shadow was now something more solid, shoulders broader, presence heavier. I blinked hard, hoping it was an illusion, hoping I'd wake in my own bed, but when my eyes opened again, it was closer. Just a step, maybe two, but enough to send every nerve in my body sparking with panic. The space between us was shrinking without sound, without movement, as though the darkness itself was closing the gap. A faint whisper filled my ears, not spoken aloud, but vibrating deep inside my skull. It was my name, stretched and broken, repeated over and over like a chant. I clutched at my head, pressing my palms against my ears, but the sound didn't stop. It wasn't coming from outside. It was crawling out of me, echoing from within, like the figure was speaking through my own thoughts. The bed sagged suddenly, as if someone had sat down upon it. The soaked sheets clung tighter to the mattress, pulling downward, indenting under an invisible weight. I wanted to look, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure. It hadn't lifted a hand, hadn't moved its head, and yet I felt certain it was the cause. My chest convulsed as a coldness spread through my ribs, seeping inward like ice water. Each breath came shorter, shallower, as though the room was stealing the air from me. The whisper grew louder, and now it was no longer only my name, but words I couldn't understand, guttural and broken syllables that felt older than language itself. I stumbled backward, my heel slamming into the wall, and in that moment, the light above flickered violently. The shadow stretched, expanding across the walls and ceiling until the whole room seemed filled with it. I felt my knees weaken, the weight of its presence pressing me lower, forcing me into stillness. And then, for the first time, the stranger in the corner began to move. Its smile didn't fade when it stood, but widened, stretching far past the edges of where a mouth should end. The skin around it split in thin lines, and yet no blood came, only a pale dryness like cracked porcelain. Its eyes never blinked, locked on mine as though it could see deeper than my face, deeper than my body, straight into the marrow of me. Every movement it made was staggered, like a puppet tugged by too many strings, jerking forward in small bursts before freezing in impossible stillness. The sound of its bones shifting inside its skin was unbearable, grinding, popping, like something breaking and fixing itself again in endless cycles. Each time it moved closer, the air grew heavier, forcing my lungs to fight for every breath. I tried to step back, but the floor beneath me stretched, lengthened, pulling me away from safety. No matter how many steps I took, the room bent itself, ensuring that I stayed the same distance from the bed. And still, the figure advanced, piece by piece, never hurrying, always certain that I could not leave. When it finally stood before me, it leaned down, face inches from mine, and the heat of its breath was wrong. It wasn't warm, but freezing, like winter wind forced down my throat. Its lips moved slowly, carefully forming words, but no sound came out. Instead, the words slid into my head without passing through the air, carried on a whisper that felt older than language itself. "You are not real," it said inside me, and my vision blurred. My knees buckled, and for a moment I couldn't tell if I was standing in the room at all or trapped inside the hollow of its skull, staring out through my own eyes. Its hand rose toward my face, trembling, fingers too long, nails black and splitting like burnt wood. When it touched my cheek, I felt nothing at first, then a sudden cold spread through me, as if every vein had been filled with ice. My skin burned with a chill, and I wanted to scream, but the sound stuck in my throat, choking me. I saw my reflection in its empty eyes, and for an instant I couldn't tell which one of us was real anymore. The room began to warp, walls bending inward, floor tilting, the ceiling lowering as if the space itself wanted to crush us together. The stranger that looked like me leaned closer until its lips nearly brushed my ear, and though its mouth never opened, I heard the words again, softer, darker, endless. "You don't belong here. You don't belong anywhere." The house seemed endless, as though every door opened not into a room, but into another trap. I ran through a dining room where the table was already set for a meal. Plates steaming with food that looked fresh but smelled rancid, crawling with movement beneath the surface. Chairs scraped back on their own as though unseen guests were rising to greet me, but I dared not look too closely. The wallpaper shifted with every step, the patterns twisting into faces that stared with wide, pleading eyes. Their mouths opened soundlessly, stretching in silent screams, their forms fading into peeling paper before I could fully recognize them. My pulse hammered louder than the creaks and groans of the bending floorboards. One hallway narrowed until the walls brushed against my shoulders, tightening with each step until I felt crushed, my ribs pressing inward, air squeezed out of me. I forced myself forward, scraping skin against damp plaster, only for the walls to suddenly spring open again, spilling me into another unfamiliar chamber. This room was filled with clocks, hundreds of them, nailed to the walls and ceiling. Each one ticked at a different rhythm, their hands spinning in chaotic patterns, some fast, some frozen, some moving backward. Their overlapping noise swelled until it felt like needles pressing into my ears, and I ran before the sound swallowed me whole. The kitchen I entered reeked of rust and rot. The knives embedded in the ceiling vibrated, quivering as though straining against whatever force pinned them there. Their points glistened with something darker than water, drops falling in slow, deliberate intervals. When one finally slipped free, stabbing into the floor beside me, I knew the rest would soon follow. I fled into the bathroom, and the stench of iron hit me immediately. The mirror's surface bled thickly, crimson running down its glass, dripping onto the cracked sink. As I stared, my reflection twisted, its face splitting into several overlapping visages. All of them mine, all of them smiling wide and wrong. I turned away, but the sound of wet laughter followed me out the door. The child's room was the worst. The toys sat in perfect rows, glass eyes gleaming in the dim light. Dolls turned their heads as I entered. Stuffed animals shifted on their own, their mouths moving. Voices far too deep for toys whispered in unison, words I could not understand, yet I knew they were meant for me. Their laughter rose, sharp and cruel, until the walls themselves vibrated with the sound. Every door I opened led me deeper into madness, and with each new room the air grew heavier. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, stretching across floors and ceilings like black veins, converging at the corners where the stranger always appeared. No matter where I fled, it was already there, waiting, as though the entire house was simply its body and I was running through its veins. My legs weakened, the weight of the place pressing down until it felt like I was running through water. Each step grew slower, heavier, and I realized the house wanted me to stop, wanted me to surrender. It was alive, yes, but not just alive. It was hungry. Last, I collapsed against a door, shoving it open with the last of my strength. Beyond, it stretched not another room, but a staircase spiraling downward into a depth so dark I couldn't see the bottom. And though every part of me screamed not to go down, the door slammed shut behind me, leaving me no choice but to descend. The forest carried a silence that did not feel empty, but watchful, as though countless unseen eyes followed me with every step. The air was damp, clinging to my skin, heavy with the scent of soil that had never seen sunlight. Each tree I passed seemed older than time, their barks splitting open in long scars that oozed darkness instead of sap. When the wind rose again, it didn't whistle through the branches like it should have. Instead, it carried faint voices, whispering fragments of words, too broken to form sentences. They slipped between the trees, circling me, growing louder if I tried to ignore them, quieter when I strained to listen. I couldn't tell if they were warning me or luring me deeper. I tried to move quickly, but the ground fought me, swallowing my steps into the soft, fleshy earth. Every footprint left behind filled with a dark liquid, spreading outward until it joined the roots of the trees. It was as if the forest itself was drinking me in, pulling me piece by piece into its soil. The shadows between the trees thickened, bending into shapes that almost resembled human figures. When I focused on them, they dissolved into ordinary darkness, but the moment I turned away, I could feel them shifting, following, breathing in rhythm with me. Each time lightning cracked across the sky, they froze until the next flash revealed them closer than before. I shouted once, my voice raw and desperate, hoping that someone, anyone, might hear me. But the forest answered back in perfect mimicry, my own voice calling from somewhere deeper within, repeating the exact same cry. The sound echoed again from another direction, then another, until I was surrounded by my own words, taunting me from all sides. The trees leaned inward as I pushed further, their branches tangling above me like skeletal hands closing into a cage. My chest tightened with the realization that the forest was reshaping itself, closing off the world behind me, ensuring that I would not leave. With each step forward, I could feel the stranger's presence stronger, though I could not yet see it. Finally, the wind died, the whispers ceased, and the air became unbearably still. It was only then, in the suffocating silence, that I felt a breath not my own brush the back of my neck. Turned sharply, lightning tearing open the sky for just an instant. And there it was standing only a few paces away. Its faceless form watching me with an attention so deep it hollowed me out from the inside. The air of the station clung to me like dust trapped for centuries, heavy and unmoving, as though time itself had stopped here long ago. The single light above flickered weakly, buzzing with a low hum, throwing long shadows across the cracked tiles of the platform. Every breath I took echoed unnaturally, as if the emptiness wanted to amplify even the smallest sign of life. The train's screech as it pulled in felt wrong, metallic and jagged, like bones grinding together. Its windows were smeared with grime and something darker that had dried into streaks. Think the shapes of hands pressed faintly against the glass from the inside. I hesitated, but the doors opened wide, and the sound they made was not mechanical, but human, a moan stretched into eternity. Stepping inside, the stench hit me immediately, a blend of mildew, iron, and decay. The fabric of the seats sagged as though something heavy had been sitting there for far too long. The stuffing inside wet, seeping a dark liquid that trailed slowly down to the floor. The ceiling lights flickered in odd rhythms, casting shadows that stretched and pulled unnaturally across the carriage. I sat, though the seat seemed to pulse faintly beneath me, and turned toward the window. My reflection stared back, but it wasn't mine. It smiled too wide, its eyes glimmering with a hunger, I didn't recognize. I tried to look away, but every window in the train showed the same face. Dozens of versions of myself staring, each one wearing the same terrible grin. The train lurched suddenly, throwing me against the seat, the wheels clattering violently on the tracks. It picked up speed quickly, faster than seemed possible, the scenery outside vanishing into streaks of shadow. Glass trembled in the frames, vibrating to the point of cracking, and the sound of grinding metal drowned out every thought in my head. I clutched at the armrest, but it dissolved beneath my fingers, splintering into dust that fell away into nothingness. The entire carriage seemed to bend with the speed, stretching longer, impossibly so. Each row of seats pulling further and further into the distance. Yet, no matter how far it stretched, I remained trapped in my place, unable to move. The noise stopped. Everything froze in silence, the train gliding with no sound, no motion beneath me. I turned, and across from me sat the stranger. Not a reflection, not a shadow, but there solid, unmoving, faceless, its body too still to be anything alive. The space between us collapsed into nothing, and I knew the journey wasn't carrying me anywhere at all. It was carrying it closer to me. The basement door loomed at the end of the hallway, yawning wide though no one had opened it. The blackness that poured from within was thicker than shadow, curling upward like smoke that never dispersed. I froze, but the weight of that unseen pull dragged me closer. Each step unwilling yet inevitable, as though my body no longer belonged to me. The air grew colder as I reached the first stair, the kind of cold that seeped into marrow and clung there. The wooden step groaned beneath my foot, the sound echoing far longer than it should have. Bouncing back from depths I could not see, my hand brushed the wall for balance, but it pulsed faintly beneath my palm, beating like something alive hidden inside the stone. Each step downward felt heavier, as if gravity itself had thickened. My legs ached, trembling under invisible weight, while the shadows seemed to shift above me, sealing the way back like a closing throat. I wanted to retreat, to run, but the pull was relentless, guiding me deeper, whispering that the only way out was further in. The basement stretched out wider than I remembered, impossible in size, swallowing me into its hollow. The floor glistened faintly, not with water, but with something darker that clung to the edges of my shoes. The smell was unbearably iron, mildew, and something sweetly rotten, a scent that made bile rise in my throat. In the center of the room, it waited. The stranger stood without sound, its body outlined in the dim glow of nothingness itself. For the first time, it did not remain still. Slowly, deliberately, it shifted 1 foot forward, and the sound of its step cracked like thunder inside my head. The closer it came, the more wrong it became. Its limbs were too long, bending in ways they should not bend, yet every movement was graceful, patient, controlled. It had no need to rush. It knew I could not escape. I wanted to scream, but the air pressed too thick against my lungs, trapping the sound within me. When it reached the edge of the lightless center, it tilted its head as though considering me. Then the shadows peeled back from its face, revealing the smooth, pale surface of skin stretched endlessly without eyes, nose, or mouth. A blank canvas where humanity should have been, yet somehow it saw me more clearly than anything ever had. The absence of features did not lessen its expression. I could feel the weight of its gaze carving into me, splitting me open without a blade. It didn't need eyes to look. It didn't need a mouth to speak. The silence between us became unbearable, filled with the press of words never spoken, but still heard. Its hand rose slowly, trembling with a hunger I could not name. The fingers were long, too long, the nails brittle and blackened, as if burned. When it reached out, I wanted to move away, but my body refused. My legs rooted to the spot, my chest heavy with dread, every nerve screaming without sound. When the hand finally touched my skin, it was colder than death, a chill that sank straight through flesh into the bones beneath. My vision fractured into darkness and light, my thoughts scattering as though stolen by that single touch. And in that moment, I woke, or at least I thought I did, gasping in my bed, teased in sweat, the room around me unchanged, yet the corner darker than it had ever been before. I was in my room, sweating, shaking. The air was still heavy, the shadows too sharp. I turned my head, and in the corner, I swear I saw it, standing, silent, watching, and I realized, maybe I never woke up at all. Long pause, whisper, "Do you see it now, standing in your corner?"